As we record this video, it is October 26, 2025. And as of the 1st of October 2025, the federal government has been in a shutdown. More than 2 weeks have passed, with agencies being furloughs, federal employees being unpaid, and military families wondering if their next paychecks will actually show up. But in the midst of all the political stalemates that is a shutdown, one private individual has stepped in and given $130 million to the Department of Defense to help cover military salaries. It's a striking moment, and it raises big questions. Why do rich Americans feel compelled to step in when government funding fails? What is the tradition of private wealth supplements for public obligations? And what do the past examples tell us about the role of philanthropy in moments of national crisis? In this video, we're going to trace the history of some affluent Americans contributing to the public good, those gestures of money, effort, and time when the government was under some strain. We're going to pay some special attention to Andrew Carnegie because his name literally is on most of the things we see out there for philanthropy. And his name is loomed very large as a capital of industry in the day and turned to major philanthropy into the end of his days. And then we're going to go back to the beginning, tied it into right now, the $130 million that was donated very unusually at this point, how it came about, and what it might mean for the future of funding things when things aren't getting funded. Part 1, the recent movement, 2025 government shutdown and private intervention. As we stated, since October 1st, 2025, the U.S. federal government has been in a state of shutdown due to partisan gridlock over budget appropriations, healthcare subsidies, and other policy riders. It happened at midnight, 12:01 or 11:59, whatever, on October the 1st. Today, it's 26 as we record this, so wherever you're in the future, it may be over. But as of right now, 25 days and counting, it's still going on. And the fallout is severe. Many federal workers have been furloughed, services halted across the nation or scaled back, and critically, active duty military personnel are facing the possibility of missing a paycheck. In response, the Pentagon accepted an $130 million anonymous donation, which is earmarked for service member salaries specifically. Now, President Donald Trump praised the donor as a great patriot, although the donor's identity and the broader legality of the donation raised eyebrows. The gift was accepted under the General Gift Acceptance Authority, and the Department of Defense has the right by that to take it in and do what they want to. That's what they say. But questions actually remain on how this consistently works for actual budgeting roles and the rules under the Anti-Deficiency Act, which prohibits federal agencies from accepting voluntary services or incursions into federal spending without congressional appropriation. Remember, Congress is not working. They have a government shutdown, not voting on anything of note, so they can't actually appropriate monies because of it. So that's where we are right now. A wealthy individual stepped in to fill a gap in the government payroll. It's pretty dramatic, it's very rare, and it sets the frame for a larger exploration of philanthropy and public service and private wealth in U.S. history. Slightly future Jay Cleveland here. We have the actual donor, the identity of donor, which came out fairly quickly after reporters went looking into it, officially confirmed later in the day on the 26th. We wrapped up the actual writing of the script on the 25th and then pulled this in here to not ruin the flow, if you will. But the donor of $130 million is Timothy Mellon. He is seen in this picture outside an inspection train during a property tour back in 1981. We don't know the date of this picture, just in somewhere in 81. We don't know where it was taken. But this is essentially the only picture we have of Timothy Mellon in 40 years. And AP provides it, so we want to give them all the props we can. This is the only picture that I can see being floated around of who he is and who he may be and why it is. We'll go deeper into some whys in a bit, even though it's anonymous, as we go into how people with lots of money want to serve with that money in times of crisis for our nation. Part 2, why wealthy individuals step in. Let's pause for a moment and consider what drives these kinds of actions. Rich individuals stepping up can do several things with these processes. They can fill a gap when government fails. When a budget impasse and emergencies leave a hole, private donors can feel compelled to ensure obligations are met. Military pay in this example, also relief for natural disasters, things like that where their big checks can actually make a difference to the people involved. It demonstrates patriotism or civic responsibility, where the wealth they have brings in power, and power they can do things for their nation. Although many believes that power and that wealth brings with it an obligation to the wealthy, powerful, patriot, or civic responsible person. Also shapes legacy and influence. Giving large sums to public institutions or national causes can cement reputation, influence policy indirectly, and align with a donor's name with national service. It's a response to crisis in real time, which unlike some philanthropic efforts which take decades to actually plan, these interventions often come when the clock ticks and can put a name or a face to an effort immediately for a long period of time. With this framework in mind, we'll go back and look into some historical examples of affluent Americans stepping up, sometimes direct support of government and military, sometimes in the public works, but always in ways that connects private wealth to the public service. Part 3. Stephen Girard and the War of 1812. One early and powerful example of this is with Stephen Girard. Born in 1750, died in 1831, the French-born banker became immensely wealthy in Philadelphia, and Girard is credited with underwriting the U.S. government's war loans during the War of 1812, when the credit of this young nation was low and the government finances were strained because of the war effort. According to accounts, during the war, when credit dried up and the country's finances were at risk, Girard stepped in and personally financed up to 95% of the war loan issues for the United States, helping the nation continue its fight on. While the contribution wasn't just simply a check to the government, it was profoundly meaningful. A wealthy private citizen using his means to support a national government ability to function under crisis. It set a precedent of sorts. The government, when under duress, sometimes depends on private wealth to maintain national commitments, or it did in past years, very past years. Part 4. Andrew Carnegie, from industry king to major philanthropist. We now arrive on Andrew Carnegie, the centerpiece of our example in this topic. He was born in 1835, and he rose from humble immigrant beginnings to build a steel empire and become one of the richest Americans of his era, and by comparison, still now. Although the dollars don't count when you put them in today's dollars or yesterday's dollars, he is essentially in the range of the billionaires such as Musk, such as Gates, and so. Now, Carnegie's lasting legacy is not just in steel, which is a big part of it, but it came from his massive philanthropic efforts and explicit thinking about responsibilities of wealth. He, at the time, was one of the original thinkers that people who had a whole lot to give needed to give as much of it as possible. In his famous essay, The Gospel of Wealth, which was published in 1889, he argued that the affluents have a moral obligation to distribute their fortunes for the public good, with the quote in that study, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." Carnegie's impact was enormous. By his death, he had given away over $350 million in 20th century dollars, early 20th century dollars, given to libraries, education institutions, research, and foundations, which also made it eponymous because his name was on basically everything. He supported the building of more than 2,500 public libraries in the U.S. and abroad. And he did not just write checks labeled for U.S. government use in all the cases. Some cases he kind of did. His work actually illustrates the broader theme of private wealth channeling through public institutions and the infrastructure for social benefit, especially in times when public institutions either could not or would not act alone. His philanthropy and practice provided a model for how high net worth individuals might play a role in public service. In many ways, Carnegie's example shows that the distinction between giving to the government and giving for the public good is a bit blurred. His work helped build public institutions, it improved civic infrastructure, and it supported public welfare. And it created space for private citizens to think of themselves as partners in the public project. A man like Carnegie throwing money at things meant other people could throw money at things and be a part of the public good and have their name be said for the good things they contributed, not just for some of the not so great things they did in business. Part 5. Other notable examples. Beyond Girard and Carnegie, many wealthy Americans have stepped into the public service in moments of crisis and patriot need. These are just a couple examples just right here. First is Cornelius Vanderbilt. In the 19th century, he attempted to donate a steamship to the Union Navy during the Civil War, but he later had to just settle for successfully donating one vessel in the future. A more recent example is Michael Bloomberg, who served in the public sense as a mayor for New York City And he also served in the public good as a rich guy giving money. He focused mostly on public health, education, and government innovation, even as he was in the government, but as a private citizen donating billions to civic institutions, signaling how modern philanthropy connects private wealth to public responsibility. And while not always direct to the government payroll, many charitable givers, which are universities, civic foundations, and veterans memorials, actually reflect the mindset that we're spotlighting here. Those with means usually doing their best to give them to serve public purposes when normal public funding channels are insufficient. So what are these examples have in common? What do they share? It's pretty simple. The timing, the scale, and the intersection of private capacity and public need. When they all come together, the money's coming from private organizations or from people's coffers themselves, do a good for the public. Part 6, connecting past to present. Let's bring this back to full circle, back literally to today, the 26th of October, 2025, as I speak these words into the camera. The 2025 government shutdown has given us $130 million in a donation to the military payroll, which is right there in the lineage of what we talked about. Someone putting up their money to help the government. And here's how it actually works. The private individual steps into the gap and fills it, created by the government funding failure, and ensures a vital national obligation, that is, military members are getting paid, will be fulfilled. The parallels from Stephen Girard underwriting lower loans and Carnegie building public libraries may be different in the actual mechanics in the works, but the principle is all similar. But the present moment has sharp new questions on how it actually should be working. First, is it even appropriate constitutionally or ethically for private wealth to help fund what is ordinarily a government obligation? Does this blur the lines of public accountability and democratic oversight? And does relying on private gifts like this shift burdens away from structured budgetary processes? The gift was accepted, as we said earlier, under the Pentagon's General Gift Acceptance Authority. It exists. It's something that's real that it could actually go to, so they can call on this one. But as we said earlier as well, many budget experts are pointing out that the move may actually conflict with the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is taking in monies, taking in industries, taking in things that aren't appropriated by Congress to go somewhere, because Congress isn't appropriating things right now. And the biggest issue is the actual number. It's a great show. It looks good. But the scale of the payroll for the government, for the military, I should say itself, it's $7.5 billion every 2 weeks. That's for active duty troops. $130 million is not going to count up to much. Literally a drop in the bucket, but it is symbolically a large number given to us, but not large enough to keep the pay going. Moments like this invite times of reflection, though. So when institutions are faltering and elite patrons want to fill the gap, there's also larger questions and systematic issues that must be detailed. It's not as easy as rich guy writes a check, as we've already seen, and we're going to see right now in this action. Part 7, implications and lessons. So what can we draw from these cases? All the cases. There are several takeaways that come about from everything we've talked about. First, private wealth can act as a backdrop in emergencies, but this should not become a norm. Historically, massive private donations happened either in a war crisis, such as Girard, or in philanthropic errors, where Carnegie reigned by giving away his money. They were extraordinary. They were not routine. Second, public obligations must rely primarily on public institutions. The United States system of budgeting and appropriations exists to ensure accountability. When private funds fill the gap, questions of oversight and democracy actually emerge. It makes us wonder, are we doing things the right way? Number 3, timing matters. The most effective interventions came when the crisis was acute and the need was transparent. In this current shutdown, understanding how and when private contributions can help without undermining public process is vital, i.e., can it actually help, and will it undermine public process? We don't actually know yet. We've only had a few days over the weekend to process it, so when it gets processed better in the Monday morning, and assuming there's no government opening, we'll have to see whether it stands up to a legality. But for a legacy and influence, they're always a part of the story. Carnegie's libraries remain, and Girard's schools remain, and modern donors too often use this, a giving, to shape a public space, a memory, or influence. putting their name on a building so people will see it and put that into the thought process that they are good, when it may not be so positive. It can be positive. Also raise concerns about private versus public priorities. There are also systematic reforms that may be needed to avoid over-reliance on philanthropy for what are essentially government responsibilities. In the context of this shutdown, we might need to ask us a couple more extra questions. Here's a very long one the robot editor gave to me, so this is not my speech, but the question still remains a good one. Could there be an automatic funding mechanism for critical national obligations like military pay so private intervention isn't required? That question is a mouthful, but it's a good question. Should we have something in place so that we don't have to call upon some private person, whether they want to just hand the money over or they're doing a favor for someone else in these cases? And so, a call to action and reflection. As we emerge from this 2025 government shutdown, hopefully very soon, the $130 million donation to the military will remain as a headline moment. But most important, it will be what happens afterwards. Will Congress revisit how the United States funds its critical obligations in times of crisis? Will citizens and policymakers reflect on the fact that private wealth stepped in because the governmental process broke down? And a big question is, although this was just a drop in the bucket, does it really matter towards the actual effect of what happens? The story of wealthy Americans giving big in moments of national need is long and extremely complex, going from Stephen Girard and Andrew Carnegie in this example, plus many other billionaires, modern and past levels, who gave donations for things that were needed. Each illustrates a moment when private capacity had to be met for public needs, and it worked. We think this one will work. We'll see what happens. But stories should also not be just a justification for the patchwork funding of letting budgetary processes fail. Knowing that some rich people stepped in is not a way to just allow the United States to not live up to its budget, period. Instead, they should remind us that power of public responsibility and potential of private generosity is there, but there should be limits to both of those. You might be asking right now, what happens when society depends way too much on private actors to fulfill necessary public duties? And how do we design systems so that emergencies like this doesn't force us to rely on some billionaire who wants to give us money and may want a little influence to fix the problem? In the end, philanthropy offers a lifeline because that's great. A stable, functioning government should not have to wait for wealthy donors' check, though, to keep its military paid or have its services running and have its people supported. The rich can and will help, but it will be the public system that must hold on to trust, because if the government can't take care of itself and we must focus on getting donations and things from rich donors, are we serving ourselves, the people, we the people, or the donors who are bailing us out?